Hello everybody, it's James of Custom Cans coming at you pre-recorded with a lovely Beyerdynamic T1 restoration. When we got these in, they were a bit old and scraggly and they clearly had some use. They were a bit mucky, as you can see here, a bit dirty. Lots of the pads were worn and faded, and the cable was completely gone, but it was time for us to give them a spruce up, bring them back to their former glory. I basically start by stripping them all apart, taking all the screws out, unclipping everything, taking the headband off, getting them all to pieces so we can see what we're working with. These unfortunately have a fixed cable, so we get quite a few of them in, loads and loads that we have to just replace the cable or sort them out. We usually end up doing a detachable mod at the same time, so we're quite familiar with working with these. As you can see here, the hinges that headband is just horrible. It's all sticky and gooey and gummy, and this does happen. It's the foam on the inside. I think this is quite an old model, and it just gives it time with all the heat and the grease from your head. It just disintegrates the foam and turns it into this horrible mushy mess you see here. Everything's practically glued together, and it's not particularly pleasant to work on. That being said, just giving your headphones a good clean is probably one of the best mods you can do to it, really. It'll make them feel all new again. Just replace the pads, clean them up and make them look all nice and spruce them up a bit, and you've almost got a new pair of headphones there, especially replacing the pads, because some of the old ones can really mess with the sound. I don't know if you've seen that graph of a HD600 with worn pads compared to a HD600 with new pads, but it's a really stark difference. It can be really worth replacing the pads to get that original sound that you might have fallen out of love with. I'm just cracking open the ring here. It's got a little O-ring that keeps the sound in. And if you've never seen the driver inside one of these, you're in for a treat, because it's a real piece of work. Look at that, it's all CNC, aluminium and steel probably, because it's magnetic. It's super magnetic. It's 1 Tesla of magnetism. I'm not quite sure what that means in scientific terms, but in practical terms it just means it's a very big strong magnet. And the main thing you'll notice about that is that the base is very clear. It's not particularly that you get a lot of bass, it's just that the bass you do have is very precise and clear, and it's not waffly at all. One thing that does mean for us headphone repairers though is that you have to really be careful around it, because any small piece of metal, any shards, anything loose will shoot away and fly straight into it. And I don't think we've ever broken a pair that way, just because we're very conscious of it, but we're always on the lookout for that happening, because it's definitely a possibility. Any little screw or iron filing, that sort of thing, will just fly there. So we usually, as soon as we're done, we take them off and we put the drivers in plastic bags, just so that they're a little bit more protected from the elements in the workshop. I actually did this mod a while ago and we just hadn't got round to making a video about it, but one thing I do remember is this part. This was a real nasty bit of work, this, having to get these back on. It was okay getting it apart, but all that, you saw that layer with the metal bit around it with all the filters, that was a hell of a job to get back together. That was not easy. But here comes the most satisfying bit really, which is where I just clean everything up. I just got the sponge, got the brush, some soap, and just scrubbed everything up. Everything came out quite nicely. It's mostly just grease and people goop, but it comes off quite nicely, so you end up with some really nice, clean, almost factory fresh parts. So I quickly whip up a couple of wiring looms for them. It's just a 4-pin socket with some wires that can go straight to the driver, because we are planning on doing a detachable cable mod on this pair. So you can see that little rubber gasket that goes around the outside of the clip. This just makes sure that it dampens the vibrations, and also it sort of keeps the sound waves inside and coming out of the right place instead of leaking around the side. So what we've just cut past there was a hell of a lot of work, getting those bits back together and lined up. I imagine they do it with a big sheet of that mesh, and all of those things are in a big sheet, and then they clamp that metal ring over, and then they trim around the outside. Because that's the only real way I can see of making it easier, but ours are obviously pre-trimmed, so I had to get it just right and just in the middle and perfectly lined up. And if you give this a go yourself, I honestly wouldn't recommend doing that. Putting these trim pieces on wasn't too bad. I just put glue on them, and then I heated them up from the outside so that the glue softened and I could squish it back into place. Here I'm just installing the holes for the 4-pin sockets, so I'm just tapping the holes there. We do that, it's more of a gesture, because it's such a thin piece of plastic. It's probably mostly held in by the glue really, but the tapping does help a bit. I'm just making up a couple more of these sockets ready to go in. We wire these Odyssey style. To do that, we connect pins 1 and 4 and then the other 2. I'm just using a little bit of stranded wire here to just make the connection around the corner. And then we just blob the other 2 together. This is some of our Litz wire that we'll be using to wire it internally. This stuff's super good. Usually we use it for everything, but on this time the customer's declined and they've chosen to reuse the original cable. That does happen sometimes. People don't want their headphones actually modified at all. They want them to be exactly as they were. Although unfortunately in this case it was to the detriment, as you'll see when I get to the cable. Tinning and soldering in general is always super satisfying in the macro lens. You can really see the solder flowing all around. It's really nice to watch. So always make sure to mark the wires just so that I know which side is which, because we twist them around, and then also so anyone who works on them in future will know, and it just makes it a bit easier for everyone. Sorry about my gross nails, the foam from the headband gets under them. Cost of doing business, I guess. I do as much of the wiring on the outside before I put the socket inside the headphone, just because then it's a bit easier, you have better access. You just put that through and thread it up. It holds it quite securely, but then we also do a dab of glue on the inside as well, just to make sure it really sticks in there. I use an old salvage socket as a key to turn it up, and this just helps me get it clocked in the right position. You want the little notch to be at the front so that they're the same on either ear, and it's just easier for you to plug it in while the headphones are already on your head, or you just know which way round it goes. So once that's all done, that's pretty much it. We pop a bunch of glue on the inside and then we can pop everything back together into one part, and this is where we get to do the testing. Here I'm just doing it on the other side. These drivers are super finicky, so you're going to be super careful when doing this. It's easy to break those pads. They can come delaminated. It's not a nice job to have to fix. So we make sure that we're super careful with them, because they're a pricey part to replace. At this point all the hard work's done really. It's just putting it all back together, and since it's a Beyerdynamic headphone it goes together nice and easily. These would definitely be one of the easiest Beyerdynamics to work on if it wasn't for the fragility of that driver. It's got the 2 exposed wires that are just like strands of human hair. They're so thin and they break so easily, and of course they're so magnetic as well, and they'll attract anything towards them. But otherwise they're almost the simplest pair that Beyerdynamic do, because they're dual entry, so there's no cable going across the headband. There's no real complications. They're super easy to work on if it wasn't for that driver. If you're confident with that, then I definitely recommend giving these a go yourself, because there aren't really an easier pair to work on. The headband can be a little bit finicky, but it's not too bad. Just make sure it clicks all the way up and make sure everything goes back together, and you'll feel it. Beyerdynamic construction is fantastic. There'll be no sort of creaks or rattles. Everything will go back together really nicely. So here's me just making the cable ready to accept our modifications. I'm putting 2 4-pin mini XLRs on either side, and unfortunately you'll see that this cable is quite past its prime. You can see there it's all sticky and goopy. That's what happens if it's too old. Then the cable can start to decay on the inside a little bit, and you get all of this goopy gunk, and it's blue because of the oxidization of the copper. That's it, essentially starting to rust on the inside, which is obviously not a good thing. But yeah, we're keeping these stock, so the cable it came with is the cable it gets. So I'm just preparing these wires ready to be used again, and go on for another 10 years hopefully. I'm not sure how long these last actually. After this they get into this sort of state, because they all do. All the T1 cables end up going goopy on the inside. There's just some component of it that decays or melts away, but they always test out fine. They generally work. They're just a bit gross really. That being said, it worked out fine here. I'm only connecting it to the top and bottom pins there, and that's because it's already wired internally for Odyssey, so we don't really need to bridge it on this one too. So just bridging it the once will be enough. You can see that the cable it goes completely solid. It's rock solid, that cable. It's not flexible or bendy. You can see just by how it holds itself up there, it doesn't flex at all. I couldn't dig those prongs into it because it just turns into like hard plastic instead of soft plastic. I think it's PVC, and it just reacts with skin oils or something, and it just does that over time. Usually we'd recommend a cable replacement for a nice soft flexible one, but there we go. That being said, I'm sure it'll continue to work fine, and the customer will be able to enjoy these for many years to come. So they're all done now, and I do love a good headphone cleaning. It's very satisfying, it's nice to do. We've put a new headband on there as well so that the flaking padding's all gone. And yeah, it's all complete now. So thanks so much for watching, like and subscribe.